morning. Sean, it's a privilege to be with you here, sir. What you're witnessing here is, I'm not saying out of formality, but some of the best HR talent you can find in the country, if not somewhere around the world. And so you are in a galaxy of people who have been there, done that. It's a privilege to welcome you. Sean, Dr. Sean McGrath is the full name, is a Vice President with World Bank, he's also fellow Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development and board member of Public Appointment Service. This must be equivalent to our USPC, right? UPSC. UPSC. A BA from University College in Galway, Masters from Dublin, Doctorate from Durham. He plays golf at 10 handicap. We'll cover that pretty neatly afterward, whether he works or he plays golf on Wednesdays. So anyway, it's a privilege to have you here, sir. Let me start, Sean, that if you look at your career both in public sector and private sector and across geographies, what are the two attributes you consider within you that made you so credible with the business?
Good morning, and Aquil, thank you very much for the opportunity to everybody here. And you quite rightly said, probably have learned more in the last 24 hours than I have in the last 2 or 3 years on myself, just understanding the talent that you have here in this country. So what are the two things? For me, not so much that there are attributes I think that people tell me that I have, but one of the things that I think is hugely important as HR practitioners is being humble. And I don't want to overestimate that. You leave your ego at the door. And I have worked in organizations, both private and public, where we have probably pound for pound some of the brightest people in the world doing what they're doing. Huge amount of IQ, but actually the EQ is probably the thing that in many cases dilutes their currency. As someone once said before, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen more and talk less. And I always believe if you want to give some wisdom to somebody who's coming up as talent in the organization, be it HR or generally in a leadership position, is just to remember where you came from. And for me, it's always been a very solid compass. No matter what position you're in the organization, the real work is done in the front lines. And that can be a driver, it can be somebody in an office meeting with customers, it's somebody in a service center listening to a complaint from a customer.
The genuine humility.
It has to be. It has to be sort of the focus.
The second one?
The second one is probably the opposite in some respects. At the end of the day, the business has to be more than the sum of the parts of the individuals. And we're there to make sure that if you look at human resources over the years, this great paradox, as I call it, one is about the individual talent and two is about the organization culture. And the challenge for us is actually probably as professionals, I think we have focused a lot on the talent, the individual over the years. Now I think we need to focus more on the culture of the organization. And I think that's where the balance, in my view, has to come back. And that's where I think you have to have a bit of resilience and you have to really make sure that, you speak truth to power in that respect.
So Sean, talking about humility and cultural fit of the organization, does it have any cultural connotation? Does it differ from country to country or region to region? I mean, I'm sure we look at Bangladesh and if you look at North America, would this apply uniformly?
Oh, for sure. You don't even need to go to different countries. You can go to north of Ireland and the south of Ireland, or you go from Ireland to the UK, exactly the same. So there's very, very strong cultural differences, very strong differences in relation to language, ethnicity, and indeed the customs and practice that people bring. But I actually think that actually is the winning factor in an organisation like the World Bank. That gives it a strength that other organisations can't get. So you tap into the brightest and the best of individuals around the world with that diversity of education, that diversity of thought, that diversity of race. It gives you sort of that cutting edge that organisations that are one-dimensional don't get.
So do you measure this in World Bank?
We do. We measure insofar as we can. I think we measure diversity by numbers. We do measure inclusion index. But at the end of the day, it's about delivery. And if the client or the customer is saying to us that your product or indeed that the way you conduct yourself isn't good enough, that for me is really where the success of all this comes in.
Very well, sir. Now, any one of you, if you have a question on the topic we are discussing, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll include them. Sean, the way the global business scenario is changing, what is, in your opinion, a formula for managing business need for change, at the same time protecting employee interest? Doing both things. What's your formula?
It's trying to get that balance, as I said earlier on, between this talent and culture. And, you know, I think what I've seen certainly in the private sector and what I've seen more in the public sector is that the meld between both are coming, certainly in big international organizations. You know, a lot of the private sector organizations want to do a lot of social good. And the idea of race to get profits, while it's important, and of course it's the lifeblood of organizations, they also want to be able to give something back to citizens that actually are customers.
Is it for PR work?
It may well be, but at the end of the day, I think when you talk to these companies and you see the individuals who are there, the leaders, clearly they actually have a very strong foundation of doing some social good. And frankly, I think you have to take it at face value. Of course the profit is there, but I think by and large, they see the value add that actually can bring to communities, they can bring to citizens, and indeed obviously to the brand as a result as well. But I do think from our point of view is that the changing nature of that relationship is something that I think over the next 3 to 5 years is going to have a dramatic effect on employees, both for good and for bad.
How do you protect that employee interest?
I think it's trying to look ahead and see what's coming down the horizons, and from a HR point of view is saying what is the cutting edge activities that we should be sort of sparring with the business to say here's where the business is going.
Can you share an example?
Well, one of the areas that I think HR is pretty good at, but it needs to get a lot better at, is actually the whole area of workforce planning. I was in Pepsi recently, and it was really interesting. Indra Nooyi, the CEO of Pepsi, was the former financial controller of Pepsi, and the one thing she said she asked for HR, which is something that we were trying to build in the World Bank. I want the numbers. I want to know how many people we need over the next 3 to 5 years, and I want to know can we afford them. Now, it's easy to say that, but actually everybody here in the room knows it's hard to sort of marry that up. So where the sort of marriage between the cost side of the labour, the volume side of labour, and of course where the labour is going or where it's needed, is a tricky business. And of course you do that in line where the business is going. In some cases they're looking at short-term sort of achievements, and the medium term is always hard to deliver. So I think that for us is really where I think we can add immense value as a function, as leaders in the organisation, to spar with the overall business and say this is really where the next frontier is, and being able in a position to adopt to these type of new dynamics that are happening in the world. In addition to that, the work that we do in the World Bank is really at the cutting edge of development, where you're looking at automation, you're looking at those unfortunately who are less well off in the world than we are, and you're looking at the whole automation, digitization, technology advancements, and you're looking at and say, well, how can we actually lift millions and millions of people out of poverty? You're not going to be able to do it by just government regulating and changing policy and putting capital. The only people who are going to be able to do it is private sector. And private sector creating jobs needs public sector involvement. So even at that level, you'll see the meld between public and private sector, where you really have to use private sector expertise and public sector expertise working together far better in that regard.
You touch upon technology now with all this artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics coming in. Do you anticipate, and there's likelihood that the need for humans will reduce in workplace? And if that happens, then how do you handle this paradox that on one hand we are custodian for human resources, and sometimes the need for the humans at workplace will go down?
I suppose when you look back over the last number of decades, you've already had that. Automation has already come in over generations. I think it's probably coming in a lot faster, and we probably have seen stuff that we won't be able to even plan as we sit here today that'll happen next year, the year after. So the pace of this is phenomenally quicker. But I do think that if you look at workers, you look at work, and you look at the nature of work, is always adapted to the next sort of generation of work. And even if you take, we have quite a significant shared services function in Chennai, which we set up in 2010. I've been there for the last few days, and we're looking at automation, we're looking at robotics as part and parcel of the processes. But the talent that we recruited are more than capable of meeting that head on, and more importantly, taking more value-add activities from other parts of our business. So much so that we can see the interface between Chennai and maybe even the end customer which is clients and the poor at the end of the day. So I think we need to be able to be in a position to sort of give them the opportunities for them to grow. But I think that the time has certainly narrowed compared to previous generations.
And do you foresee any major shift or inflection happening in the whole combination of talent available yet moving to automation?
It's probably you could say yes, it will. Is the easy answer. I think it's going to be in our case is going to be, we want the brightest, we want the best talent we possibly can. We want to do it at a cost that's affordable to the taxpayer as our owners. But more importantly, I always see that human beings and indeed people like HR professionals have always found that next generation of activity and work that actually allows them sort of scale up. And a lot of work that's done today and a lot of work that we're doing as HR practitioners will be gone tomorrow. That's just the reality. In fact, the teams that you're in the next 3 to 5 years may be disappearing completely.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what's the next generation of work? And I think by and large, human beings have always sort of adapted to that environment.
We will survive.
Yes.
Any question at this stage from anyone? Yes, sir. Keep it brief. And
I think in the automation thing, which
the whole automation and robotics thing, I have a view, the way, as an HR, what we will be looking at is enhancing the, the job content of people, and, all the kind of mundane work or routine work would be going for automation. So I think that way, as a human potential would be enhanced, and all the thing which is low-end jobs, so-called, can be into the ambit of automations and all that. And I think that's the way I think the value chain is going up. That's what I feel.
that's what Sean was mentioning, that it'll be just shifting. It will not be replaced.
Because that's the service as a human resource professional we would be doing to enhancing and realizing the potential of people.
I saw one more hand being raised. Uday, I'll come back to you, sir. Uday, quick one.
I'll just repeat my questions. How do you look at talent mobility across geographies, given that many countries are looking within and preferring local employment?
Yeah, I think, where HR, certainly if you take the World Bank, which is a really good example, 16,000 staff split between Washington DC and 120 different countries. And we grew up in a pretty archaic public service international organization where we have a brand called an international recruit and we have a brand called a local recruit. And never the twain shall meet. In private sector you have expats. And what you've seen over the last 20 years is that the talent pool is actually in the locally recruited staff. Education levels have come up. We have in our admin and clerical staff in country offices, about 17% of them have have masters or PhDs. Now, 17%. So that would have been unheard of 20 years ago. And from our point of view, is if we don't leverage that, I think we're cheating them and cheating those that we serve. So by and large, we have an untapped resource that we have to be more globally mobile. But it can't be the idea that a white male from an Anglo-Saxon university comes into Washington and knows it all. Them days are gone, and we culturally have to move to the point where we are tapping in this great mobile workforce. In the banking sector, internationally as well, the expat, you take Standard Charter, 80,000 staff. They used to have about 7,000 expats on their books. 7,000 is a lot, just less than 10%. And of course, the cost of keeping an expat rotating around jobs, they're down to less than 100 as we sit here today. So what they're saying is you go into a local market, you get paid for mobility, and you move based on talent. And I think by and large, that's where the organization, if you want to retain and grow the knowledge in the institutions, otherwise you'll lose it. And from the likes of the World Bank, knowledge is key for us. At the end of the day, we can, talk to ministers of finance, tell them what's happening in governance in Peru, what's happening this similar, what's happening in India. And that's a very, very important commodity for us.
So let me share a trait of Indian HR leaders. Besides what you have seen yesterday, people like him have an extrasensory perception also. Because this was my next question and he stole it before I could ask.
I saw you.
So, you saw that. So I was coming back to a similar question what Uday asked Sean, that there are geographical pockets where talent resides available, say India for example. And there are geographical pockets where opportunity resides. Without taking names, there are people who are shutting doors to say, stay away from us. Now, this is not going to work for both. How do you see this thing shaping up in future? Not very long future, but in near future.
I think it's going to be challenging. Certainly the wins is, as you say, it's going to be slightly uncomfortable, I think, in the short term. But I do think if you look at the axis of where growth, where the economies are going to grow and where the talent is, it's actually in Asia. And the opportunities are on this side of the world rather than on the eastern side of the world. And I think that is for most organizations in multinational and private sector and organizations like ourselves. This question is, how do you sort of put a foot or an anchor into these areas that you can actually harvest the talent that's here, grow it, and actually be able to cross-pollinate back into other areas. And that's a challenge for us, but at the end of the day, if there's going to be barriers put up or challenges put in place, then clearly the access was going to go to Asia a lot faster than it is.
So what will happen? I mean, the talent pool lies here, opportunity lies there. Where do they meet?
I think at the end of the day, if you just take, for example, a lot of the multinationals, in my own context in Ireland, all the European headquarters for, I think, the top 100 companies in the US are actually now based in Ireland. The incentives are there for them, the talent pool is there for them, and while there's a lot of talk about repatriating back to the US, for example, it's not going to happen in reality. So the business and the talent will merge, and more importantly, if the economic growth is going to be in other markets, going back to the US is not where it is.
Excellent answer. So, Sean, you have set up a shared service center in Chennai, 2010, 11?
Yeah.
And 1,000 people now?
Just less than
1,000 people. Did cost arbitrage bring you here?
Yes. He says me short of the answers.
So if it is so, if you look at countries like Philippines, now over the last 15 years, the PPP has now reduced to 7 to 9% between India, equivalent talent in Philippines. If it's on cost arbitrage, in your opinion, is this sustainable?
Yes. And I'll tell you why, because we went with the view before I joined, but if you look at the going to India, we had a pretty good idea that not just the cost arbitrage, but the talent was here. Because we actually have a lot of Indians working in the World Bank Group,
right.
Giving very, very significant contribution to our goals. And what we have seen is not just building a shared service at a significantly reduced cost, taking a lot of costs out of our system in DC and putting it into Chennai, is actually the fact that the talent is able to adapt as we go forward. And if we didn't have that, then you may be looking at horizons further. And from our end, we're relatively small, I think, when it comes to a shared services function. So we still haven't scratched the surface of the art of the possible for the Chennai plant that we have. So we see, the cost arbitrage is still there, but more importantly, we're locking in knowledge there that by and large you will not be able to transfer.
Would you expand that?
That's our intention. I think we have grown significantly since the last 5 years. We're interested in more consolidating now and making sure that our processes are working far better than, when you bring in, you close elements in Washington, you bring in new work, you really need to make sure that your internal sort of activities are fresh, and that's our challenge. But we certainly would expand for sure.
Let me come back to the gentleman. You would raise your hand to ask a question. Keep it brief, ma'am.
You are being biased on the left side, Akil. This side you should ask.
Leftist.
This is here.
Leftist approach, right? Hi, Pankaj.
Yeah, so I'm saying you have to
This is
give
the
some
advantage
chance.
you have because you have a mic in your hand.
I just got it. I said once you ask the question, then I'll go. After that. Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
go ahead. Go ahead, sir. No, go ahead.
We'll let the lady go, sir.
Please go ahead.
There is a lady also.
Okay, go ahead,
Both
sir.
of us, the lady got the chance.
So my question is.
Keep it brief.
Yeah. So usually HR in organizations, multinational Indian organizations, the focus right now is more on employees within the organization. Tomorrow's organization, we know, will be more of a gig economy, it's a shared economy. It's about nurturing capabilities outside the organization. How would the role of HR change at a multinational corporation level?
I think it's the point that I mentioned earlier on, is that some of the parts need to work far better in organizations. I think, as you say there, that the talent individually in organizations has been not necessarily biased towards workers, but has been very individually focused. So if you can harness that and sort of move up the value chain of how some of the parts come together, my word, the opportunities are massive. Within organizations, within teams, and of course within big multinational organizations, because I think that they wrestle with all of the challenges. The big companies wrestle with all the challenges that we wrestle with in small SME businesses as well. And the question is, how do you get more efficient and more effective? I think
efficiency.
Yeah, I think automation is going to play a huge part in that, but more importantly, collaboration, and to be able to collaborate across different geographies, virtually as well as face to face, is going to be so more important.
So Pankaj, to you, John.
Thank you, Akil. So Sean, my question was that there are about 23% jobs that India will lose over the next 3 to 4 years. If you look at globally, that's the share India will lose due to automation. But the wages that we are going to lose is just 7%. Right? So it clearly reflects that we are losing very low-end jobs, and it puts huge stress not on our organized economy, but the unorganized economy. So any views you've seen in the Western world, how the organized sector kept growing? And unlike India, where 90% of our sector or jobs are still in an organized sector. So would love to hear some views how it has happened in the West and what can India learn from it.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's innovation. The question is what's around the corner and how you innovate, and how you, as HR people, you can create the environment in organizations and the climate for that to happen. In an environment like the World Bank, we do incredible amounts of innovation, but we're also risk averse in many respects. So the question is, can you create the environment in a sort of an organized workforce for that to sort of grow and develop? And we just talked about it earlier on, but if you go to, for example, in Rwanda, Rwanda has come out of a very, very difficult, almost a decade of strife. And now you see drones delivering blood to patients in places that they would never be able to do that. That's innovation. And we see that time and time again, country by country, not so much in the developed world, but actually in the developing world. So I think we can learn more of this idea of South-South rather than coming from East-West. And I think that's really where knowledge, collaboration, and indeed, trying to sort of see what the next iteration of work looks like is going to be very, very powerful.
Thank you. Your question, sir.
May I? I've been wanting to ask a question.
Just hold for a minute, ma'am, because I would be fair to the right side of the audience also.
But you're not gender fair then.
Oh, this is nice one. This is a nice one. I'll hold you for that later on. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Sean, wonderful to hear you. I'm Ketan Devan from Velocity. We are automating the recruitment process using AI and videos. So question is, you're talking about dichotomy. Human brain is divided, so we are in dichotomy all the time. Now, I want to hear, a short story if you can share where you had a dichotomy between two words that you used, humility, innovation, and we have two here, HR and business. So, humility, innovation, when you took in direction towards HR versus towards business.
Okay. I think when you look at the business of the World Bank Group, we're here to eliminate poverty and increase shared prosperity. And at the end of the day, we spend taxpayers' money. So if you take, for example, the idea of humility, we want to create an environment where people feel they have opportunities, where they feel that they're belonging. But more importantly, in the American context, if you lose your job in the World Bank Group, you have 30 days to pack up and leave the US. Because the visa issue is very much based on the job. So we've gone through a very significant change program to the point where many people lost their jobs. But at the end of the day, is it this humility that you want to show for individuals, or ultimately do you have to begin to make sure you're more efficient for taxpayers to deliver more for people who are less well off? And that's the challenge, because an organisation like the World Bank doesn't do that every day. In fact, we've done a change program in the expenditure the first time since 1946 after World War II. So you can well imagine that cultural challenge that we had, and indeed the idea that you have groups of people who grew up together making these decisions of the trade-offs between one and the other, I think is very, very difficult to do in that setting. But for me, it has to be the business that succeeds every time, and at some point in time, you have to make that call.
So your question, ma'am?
So finally, I'd just like to ask Sean that you very rightly said that culture is a great differentiator, and most of the organizations are moving from directional culture to multi-directional, and especially an organization like yours, which has people from all over the world, let alone different cultures. So how do you induct the new hires into the culture of the organization?
We put a lot of time and effort into our onboarding, even before people come on board. We do an incredible amount of outreach. What we've tried to do is plan our workforce to make sure it's as representative as anybody. Unlike the United Nations, we don't have quotas. But we do begin to have targets, gender parity, for example, and indeed for different regions of the world, we try to hit these targets. But importantly, I think it's very much around how do you actually hold someone's hand as they come in the door and build a rapport with the individual, build an understanding of the culture. And in the World Bank, that culture is very, very palpable, because at the end of the day, we have incredibly gifted individuals who have come up through the organization, who are working with people, doing the work that you may be aware of, that really you're not going to be able to get it in a week or a month. So from our point of view, I think that diversity of thought, role modeling for the leadership at the top is so, so important when it comes to diversity. At the end of the day, if they don't walk the talk on this, we're in trouble. And we're very, very, I suppose, thankful to have a senior leadership and indeed a board of directors that actually sort of began to keep this as very much as a corporate priority time and time again.
So trying to get some empirical reference point to a question, what would be your attrition of new hires in the first 12 to 14 months?
Our attrition overall is less than 3%.
And for the first 12 months?
It's probably slightly higher, I would say maybe 4 or 5%. But again, it's the nature of the work. So if people are coming in for 2 years' work or 1 year's work, clearly they just leave and we take that as a factor.
But obviously it's very low and you pay a lot of attention to induction.
Yeah, but also before even people come here, we really have to make sure that people understand what we're trying to do, understand the work and understand the environment they're coming into.
Okay, so let me move from Sean as a global HR leader and thought leader and all that to Sean as a person, as an individual, as a professional. So when you hire people in your team, what are the 2 qualities you look for?
Humility.
Besides humility. Yeah. I was just going to say besides humility. No, I'm just joking. But humility is what?
Well, I think there's 2. One is to be a team player. And 2 is fire in the belly for the work that they do.
Passion.
Yeah, for the work they do, either private sector or public sector, but at the end of the day, human resources is about people. 99.9% of people come to work to do a good job, and from our point of view is how they're managed and led is key. And if you don't have fire in the belly to sort of succeed in that environment, to really make sure that people are cared for, but also challenged in their work environment, have supportive bosses, you know, the A to a Z of human resources, then clearly they're going to be wrestling.
So having hired this type of people, how do you develop them? What are the specific things that you do to develop them? Your team members.
Yeah, well, we do the formal development in relation to SHRM, CIPD, etc. We try, and we've done this a lot more successfully over the last number of years, look outside of the 4 walls of the World Bank, because we don't have all the answers, either in HR or in the organization. And you get incredible knowledge, small little nuggets that you bring back, you try, you test, and you just create the environment for
the response itself is an indication of your humility. So, let me ask you something, that you are a very keen golfer. 10 handicap?
That's right.
You play on Wednesday morning also?
I wish.
And you run marathon. Tell me, with all this busy schedule, work schedule, how do you manage to do this work-life balance here?
Probably the worst person you can ask about work-life balance is who knows. I have a fantastic team, and I think from my end, if I was away, I was traveling, or just on leave, the team do all of the heavy lifting. I hope I create an environment for me to do that. And that team has taken time to develop, has been time, and I'm very fortunate that I have Sanjeev here who heads our shared services, and he came from the private sector. But it just allows you the safety net that you're pulled in so many different ways that actually the team can actually just get on with the business. And importantly as well, if it's a mission-driven organisation like ours, I think every day you come into work and say, well, that's why we're coming into work, to try and help those who are less well off. So if you don't want to work here, well, then you should.
So is the emphasis on this work-life balance culturally related, in your opinion? Like, is the Asian culture a little less focusing on work-life balance? I mean, I'm generalizing it, but do you see the difference?
Yeah, I do, but actually I think the more you talk about work-life balance, the more it's an issue. Maybe I'm being too hard on that, but I think we raise it in as part and parcel. You know, it's called common sense. If you can put it into a bottle and sell it, I think we make a fortune. But at the end of the day, as I said, 99% of people come to work to do a good job. We have to create the environment for them to do that. And if that means they need time off or they need flexibility, then we should give it to them. I don't think we should stand up here and say we need to do this, this, and this as a result and shove it down our own throat. So really and truly from our end, it's really to build the leadership in the organisation that creates that climate.
So share with us, how do you upgrade your knowledge and what's your learning style?
I don't think I have a learning style. Everyone says I'm too impatient. So no, I think 5 minutes. I think you know, it's.
I've got 9 minutes and 9 seconds.
She's got you.
So we go by 5 or 9? 9. Sorry, Anjali. I mean, this is the democratic country so far. But we'll finish on time, don't worry. Sorry.
I think the sitting with people in the business, understanding their concerns, understanding their challenges, and trying to come up with some constructive insights to help them. And you may not, but at the end of the day, I think they feel that the organisation is there to support them, and you'll get that additional discretionary effort that you're looking for to go that extra yard.
Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. My name is Preeti, and I used to, till 2011, also head HR for UNICEF in India. So my question is on the first point you raised on employees doing social service as a part of their employee engagement and getting motivated. I see a lot of maybe sporadic private fundraising connect between UN organizations, the World Bank, and the private sector. What are your thoughts on a more active partnership which could actually make a real difference in the society?
Well, actually, it's happening. It's very, very active out there. In fact, you know, the World Bank is no longer the only game in town. If you look what's happening in China, in the world of development, private sector, development foundations, very, very active. I think if you look at the challenge, though, is actually to bring them together. Because no matter how much funding they can raise, the demand is 10 times as much.
It's not just about the fundraising. My question is more about employees coming in together to be able to roll up their sleeves. And in India, it's not as much. So any tips for people around this room who are HR leaders, how can they make this a better and more active association?
Well, what we've seen from our end, for example, with the United Nations, particularly at the leadership level with Jim Kim and Ban Ki-moon, who was there, that our relationship with the United Nations at a central level and as a result trickled into our country office operations for both the UN went tenfold. And on specific projects, here's how we're going to collaborate, here's how we're going to engage, either on the security side or on the humanitarian side. So from our point of view, we were certainly challenged by our leadership to make it happen in a more proactive way. So we've seen huge strides in that way, just in relation to the UN itself.
So now you're convinced two gender questions came together. Any other questions? Oh my God, third one also.
My name is Pallavi and I'm from DuPont. I wanted to understand, you mentioned about Sean Inclusion Index that you're measuring in your organization. So could you just give an overall brief on how you do that? And on testing your HR process knowledges, by the way.
So we have an annual engagement survey which we measure a whole range of questions and answers from our staff. And within that we have an inclusion index that we've constructed. We can share some of the information afterwards if people want to see it.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Manoj, and what I want to understand from you that we are living in a world where the landscapes are changing, a lot of disruptors are happening on political side, on financial side, on technology side. What are you doing to ensure that the employees they understand that and proactively they are doing whatever is required to learn, relearn, and understand that how the landscapes are changing and how they should take the responsibility of aligning themselves so that they remain relevant in tomorrow's time.
The employees.
Well, we've done actually an awful lot in this area. If you just take, we've actually changed our structure to make sure knowledge flows in the right way. Rather than having a regional model, we've actually a global model and our global practices. So that's been hugely important. In addition to that, collaboration has to be a key part of how people work in the World Bank Group going forward, both in the private sector arm as well as the public sector arm of the World Bank. And I think the other part from our point of view is that we also ask employees, this is part of your job. And at the end of the day, the idea of how they develop themselves and their careers is going to be based on a number of criteria which we hardwire into our system and expect it to be done. Because I think the way we spoon feed anymore is not a thing, as we know, as part and parcel. It's my development, it's my opportunity. And we expect them to be a sort of cutting edge of their areas of expertise. We need to be leading and socializing these ideas across the organization, and their obligations to pass that on to other members of their team. So we've done an awful lot, both formally and informally, in the organization.
I think one more question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Sean. Do you have any views on Agile HR, which is just coming on the fringes right now? Many people are talking, many countries, especially in Europe, about Agile HR. Do you have a view on it? As in Agile HR is a new term.
Agile, yeah. I suppose it's just Agile Organizations. We started a program in the World Bank, Agile, and we started in operations, and we're one element within that, like our legal services, like our operations and our policy side. So what we're really trying to do is allow the front line to be empowered. Here are the things that stink, here are the things you need to get rid of, and the question is how do we support that, working it back from the front line. So it's still early days. I think you can brand it what you want. You can brand it excellence, you can brand it continuous improvement. These things are always going to be part of innovations in organizations. But I think anything like that is very positive and good for any organization.
Does it answer your question?
That's okay.
Right. So let me ask you that if you were to rewind your life, go back, what are two things you'd do differently?
We tried to become a professional golfer. That's one thing. And I would have tried to join the World Bank Group earlier.
Earlier?
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, actually it's a phenomenal place to work. In fact, if you want to work in development, which I didn't know anything about before I came here, I think it's the best place to work in the world. When you come in the door of the World Bank Group, we have this banner called We Dream About a World Free of Poverty. And in 2012, Jim Kim came into the organization, and 180 ministers of finance said, let's stop dreaming, let's make it reality. And you can see a public sector organization that in many cases, while it changed over the years, was turbocharged into sort of making it happen by 2030. And it's been very, very dramatic change internally, which has been great. So they're the two things I would say to you.
But on a professional or personal development point of view, do you do anything different?
Probably not. When I look at it now, no.
So my last question. We have something called mantra in India. Mantra is like a gist of wisdom. So in less than 5 words, can you tell our friends here what will make a credible CHR? Less than 5 words.
Less than 5 words. I was going to say 2 ears and 1 mouth. I've already said that.
Okay.
Thank you.